Hey there, my friend. This is Dr. Anthony Balduzzi, and I want to welcome you back to another episode here on the Fit Mother Project podcast. And I'm truly excited to share this particular episode with you because we are blessed to be having a conversation with one of our own Fit Mother members, Sarah Rose. And one of the reasons I think this conversation stands out so particularly for me is we not only recount a wonderful woman's fitness journey through this program, you know, the journey of establishing and building more strength, of getting nutrition dialed in. We also talk about her career as a teacher of 18 years and some of the stuff that she's experienced, particularly in the last few years of the pandemic, and getting a little bit of an insider's perspective on school, what kids are going through, what it's like not only to keep ourselves healthy and be a role model for our own families, but maybe even for the world, and how we can have a positive impact. And at the end of this conversation, and this is why I encourage you to stick to the end, Sarah shares some really profound stuff about self-love, grace, and there's just a lot of wisdom baked into this conversation that goes far beyond the mere confines of nutrition and exercise advice. And that's our intention here at the Fit Mother Project, to make this a holistic, integrated journey for you. I think Sarah is a wonderful example of this, and I think after listening, you're going to find that too. So without further ado, let's get into today's conversation with Fit Mother, Sarah Rose. All right, Sarah, welcome officially to the Fit Mother Project podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
This is fun. I think it's like, before we kick off into the intro of you and your background, just like the nature of the fact that we can hang out on a Friday, we're recording this, like across the country, and you get to share your story, and the fact that you found this program online, like, it humbles me, and I'm grateful that we can have this conversation today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
All right, so let's get into some background info on you. Name, age, where you're from, and anything you'd like to share about your family and what you do for work.
Okay. My name is Sarah Rose, and I am from the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I actually live in Olympia, Washington.
Nice.
I'm 46 years old, or 46 years young, let's say that. I am a teacher, a high school teacher. I've been teaching for 18 years.
Wow.
So the last few years have been kind of a wild ride.
For sure. Maybe we'll get into that, because that must have been crazy, like unprecedented time for sure.
Yeah. Let's see, I have two beautiful children. I have a 13-year-old girl, and she's wonderful. And my son, actually, his birthday is today.
Really?
So yeah, he's 11, and he loves baseball. So I'm wearing baseball earrings for him.
Nice.
My husband is the one who kind of got me into all of this, and his name is Evan, and he's a fit father. So yeah. Nice.
Okay. So take us back on, like, it's interesting because you were, I may imagine, gifted this program from him being on Fit Father.
Yes.
What was it like
Yeah.
going on in your life, like when you're gifted this program? So like you're gifted phase one of this, like, were you asking for it? Was he like, what was he doing in the background ahead of time? Like, set the stage for what's going on in your family by the time you receive this, and then like also getting started on it.
Okay. Well, we were talking about when he originally came across it. It was a year or two ago, and I can't remember when he gifted it to me, but I was kind of like, okay. And I just knew that he was doing it, and he was going out into the garage and doing workouts, and he would come back really sweaty, and he's like, oh, that was really great, and I really like what we're doing. And at the time, I was really invested in my daily yoga routine, and I think that was also at the time that I had just finished training and running a 50K, or I was in the middle of it. I can't remember.
Can we pause there for a sec? Because you did say 50,
yes.
You did say 50K. Because I think most people are.
I did.
We actually were considering launching a Fit Mother program to run your first 5K, but that's like a little longer than that. It's not like a normal thing. So just like let's like do a quick background on that. Like, why do you choose to run 50K, and like how did that start?
I have to honestly credit all of my activity as an adult to my husband. My family wasn't super, when I was growing up, my parents worked a lot, and we would do a family vacation, and we might like go on quick little hikes or whatever once a year, but it was nothing crazy. But my husband he was an avid climber, runner, all this stuff when he was young, and he skied, and when I met him in our early 20s, he was for Christmas. We weren't even married yet. He bought me my first pair of cross-country skis. So that was my introduction into like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing this. And so when I got into running, it was actually, I mean, I ran a little bit here and there, but I did track in like 8th grade, and I ran cross country in 9th grade. And then I got into other things like theater, band, and yearbook. And then I had to choose once you get to high school. But when I had my son, actually, in 2012, I just kind of went, oh, you know what? I think it's time. I want to train for a half marathon and run a half marathon. And that's where I started. I started with half marathons because my husband had really demystified like the whole running scene for me. So distance wise, he'd already done some of that kind of running. And so, yeah, that's how I got into running was through him.
Into 50Ks.
Eventually they do. Well, then, you get connected with other runners. And so I was running with other women in our community. And I had a friend who was like, I want to run this. She said she wanted to run a 25K, this 25K. And I was like, all right, well, if I'm doing that with you, then I want you to do this 50K with me, because I was like, why not? I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I mean, I kind of did. I'd run a road marathon prior to that, but yeah, no, I just sort of went for it. That's kind of what I do.
It's a good personality trait for sure.
I get down a path. Yeah. So
is it fair to say that even though you were training a lot, it's kind of like the runner's paradox. Like there's a lot of people who do run a lot, but still aren't necessarily happy with their body composition. Like, was that the case for you, or were you happy at the time? And then kind of how has it progressed to the time that you're now in Fit Mother?
For me, there's been a couple of times in my life where with weight fluctuation, looking in the mirror, I'm like, I feel kind of frumpy. I don't really, this isn't working for me. In your 20s, your metabolism slows down. And I kind of went through that process, like like the year before my husband and I got married. Tried Weight Watchers, did that, immediately stopped right after, the wedding, that kind of thing.
So like one of the things we preach in the program is you count out exercise a bad diet. And yet it's also an incredible amount of exercise to be running. So I was curious if you found that to be the case for you while you were running and how your body composition was.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I never started running for the purpose of losing weight because I knew that kind of information. I don't know. I've like absorbed that stuff over the years, and it was really more about strength for me. Whenever I've gone into trying these different sort of activities, like, in this case, okay, I'm going to go try this Apex, back when I was gifted the Fit Mother 30 X, it was more like I'm just going to give this a whirl and see what happens, because for me it's about strength and overcoming a challenge. And I've always known that you can't, what you eat is primarily what determines, kind of your body composition, as you were putting it. Yeah.
And so now you're in phase 2 of FM30X. I believe phase 2, month 2, is that correct?
Month 1. Okay. I'm in month 1. Yeah. So, I put it off. I met with Amy back in August, and it was right before the school year started. And so we had talked. She's like, you should just go for it. Go for phase 2. And I was like, I don't know. And I think I had this mentality, and this is kind of how my personality is. I'm a perfectionist. And so I want to get things kind of just right as far as I'm concerned, before I move into the next phase. And so I waited partly because school gets crazy. September's like a marathon itself, if you want to go with running metaphors. And so when I kind of got through that, then, October, it just sort of dragged. And my daughter, who I mentioned before, she is a dancer, and I became heavily involved with her ballet company and helping. I'm like one of the volunteer coordinators. And so when Nutcracker came up, I was all in on that. And so in December, I'm like, okay, January. And so that's what I did. Started, and I'm loving it. I remember reading on the Facebook group, like women saying, I love the belladonna workout. And I was like, yeah, it's really fun. I didn't realize at the time that it was also an apex, sort of, structure, also. And then the total body burn is really fun. I've just kind of that traditional, and I'm really having fun too, because I think in phase 1, I was very timid. I came into this very timid because I've had a lot of strength issues in my core. Yeah. I mentioned in kind of my bio to you that, I have a history of cancer. I am 15 years cancer free, but I had abdominal surgery back in I think it was 2007. And after that, it was like, everything's just mixed up down there. And then I had 2 kids.
Yeah.
And so when I went into my running, it was more like, I'm just going to do this. But I was so focused on getting all my runs in, the training plan for the runs. It's like you don't get that whole body strength build. And so my core was always weak. And it affects, a lot of things, including speed. And so coming out of that was my goal. And one of the things that I found amazing, and this is just from when I was still doing, I was kind of continuing to do Apex 10, hadn't really upped my weights. And in November, I don't know, a lot of people have probably heard of the Planksgiving challenge, where you work up to like a 3-minute plank, over the course of the month. And I had always had to bow out within 5 days because I would tweak something or just kind of get off. And, I got to the end of it, and I was like, I posted in the Facebook group. I'm like, oh my God, for the first time ever, I did the Planksgiving challenge, and I owe it all to, the Fit Mother Project, because I never dreamed. I had spent the last 5-10 years going, I just have a weak core. Yeah. I don't think I'm going to be able to overcome this. Yeah.
I really want to recognize you for that, because maybe I'll put some words in your mouth, and it's not fully my intention, but it's just such a powerful experience when you have something on your mind and your heart for a long time, especially in the form of a physical limitation from a surgery or an injury, or in your case, cancer, and going through that journey. And then, man, my wife recently gave birth last year, so I got to see firsthand what happens to a woman's core through that process, and it is amazing. And then to be on the other side of that now, and to have achieved strength and stuff that you thought were previous limitations in your mindset and your body, I don't know. For me, it feels like a deeply fulfilling, maybe even spiritual experience to experience some of your deep desires become true through a combination of hard work, patience, time, faith, etc. Can you speak into that a little bit more, the emotion around that?
Yeah. It's been interesting because the sort of, I view all of it as this big journey. I, having had cancer and surviving, and I went into both of my pregnancies with I survived cancer, so I'm going to have natural childbirth. And I did. And I was like, okay, I survived cancer, natural childbirth, and now I'm going to run and then up the running to 50K, like we talked about. So there's this progression. And I think through all of that, once, I waited till the end of last school year, because Evan had been kind of here, try this, with the Fit Mother. And I just knew I needed the headspace because, as a teacher in the last few years, it's been really hard. And so I waited, and when I did the first Apex, I couldn't believe it. Actually, if I think back, sometimes I forget the first Apex I did. I was wandering around the house going, I can't feel anything. Like, my body is just like, oh my God. And my brain was in this fog, and I looked at Evan and I'm like, oh, I feel like I just ran 20 miles because that's how it felt. Like, my body was so depleted from the whole experience. And I'm like, I did that in like 60 minutes. But, if I were to be training, and I did a 20-mile run, that would take me hours. So it was a really interesting trade-off.
Yeah.
But the emotional thing that has come out of the last, that's like 8 months, I guess, has been tremendous, because I'm like, oh my God, I really can do anything. And it's impacting every area of my life right now. It's been a really rough couple of years, 18 years of teaching. And my whole sort of mantra over the years has been to integration as a big, important concept for me. And so when I think about this journey with Fit Mother, I want to integrate it into my life, but I want my life to integrate into it. And that is emotional and spiritual in a lot of ways, because, I love how structured I can be, because I look at the training sort of like, I see it as a training plan. I look at your month, here's what you can do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I think, well, I can do that because that's just like a running training plan. It's the same sort of thing. But I also look at that, and I've seen other moms post about it in the Facebook group, just questions about, can I do this? Can I do that? And to me, it's like, well, you have to make the map your own. And so that's really what I've been working on. It's like, this is my own roadmap. This is my life. I want to continue doing my daily yoga. I want to continue to run. What does that look like? I was so excited when I got your New Year's email, and I watched your video where you talked about all the things that you guys have planned for the next year. And I'm like, oh, there's a running plan in there. There's the yoga for fit moms. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. So
that's awesome. And let's talk a little more about the idea and the theme of integration, because I think that is the goal of a successful Fit Mother transformation, is that you get integrated with the mindset around health. You get integrated with the nutrition plan that works for you and your family. You get integrated with workouts that you own and you make your own, as well as the knowledge surrounding that. Let's maybe zoom into like the food component, because I think that's a big thing that runs a lot of households.
Yeah.
Especially when you have kids that you're feeding at home, and now you have a husband who also eats a certain kind of way. How has this been an integrated journey on the nutrition side of things?
It's been wonderful. We've explored the perfect plate in the last couple of years. I worked with a nutritionist a couple of years ago. It wasn't a great fit, but we had it kind of in mind, and so we knew we should be doing it. And we haven't, as busy families, it's really difficult. Like, I feel like portion wise, we've been pretty smart the last few years, and we've never been super junk food heavy house. I didn't grow up with sweets or anything like that. So I don't have that kind of sweet tooth that I know a lot of people have, but I have a love of like potato chips. and my husband and I, especially during, the pandemic, I think a lot of people, it's like need that glass of wine or whatever, but I learned early on, not early on, but several years ago, my mom passed away, and We haven't talked about low points, but the low point in my life was my mom's passing, and I knew what was happening. I was very, and maybe a lot of this comes from that, really kind of like this sort of realization of, okay, this is the path I want to take. My mom died when she was 66, and I don't want that to happen to me. And so she passed 5 years ago, and in the last 5 years, that especially that first year, I was heavy with grief.
Yeah.
And all I wanted to do was sit and stare out the window. I live in the Pacific Northwest. It rains a lot.
Yeah.
So I stared at the rain a lot. I read a lot of poetry, and at night I would down half a bag of potato chips and drink wine, and I got to my heaviest ever. And I would say that our journey to fit the sort of, I want to call it the Fit Family project, really came from, I was like, oh God, I gotta, eventually I said, okay, I need to rein this in. And I tried, I didn't just try, I was very successful. I used the Noom app that a lot of people have tried, and I dropped a ton of weight, but it wasn't in a healthy manner. So talking about nutrition, it was like, you can kind of cheat it. Anything with that has points or calorie counting, you can kind of still eat whatever you want, but you're not necessarily eating the right things. And so that's kind of what happened. And I actually, at my lowest weight, I weighed several pounds less than I do currently. But I see pictures of myself from that time. I was also training for the 50K, and I was tired all the time. And it was just like, oh gosh, this isn't the way I want to come back. So with the nutrition, it's sort of changed our whole household. Our daughter, being 13, being a dancer, has really, we can see her listening and paying attention and wanting to know, she kind of does her own thing. She's very, very opinionated. She'll probably listen to this and go, yeah, I yeah. But it's been great because, I'm so lucky. We are so lucky that we're such a good team. My husband and I, we just fully support each other in this and before this. And so with the perfect plate and, dinner, that's really where we needed to focus our energy, is vegetables, making sure that we've all got it. We're working with our son. He's a little picky eater, but he's getting better. Yeah. But I would say for me, I love the shakes. They're so easy. I was concerned in the fall and so if anyone who listens or watches this, is like, oh, my gut gets off, sometimes with it. And I was having that problem back in the fall, and I don't know, I just learned, I guess, to kind of take a break and then come back. And I also figured out that I couldn't drink it. I have to get up really early. Our report time for school is really early. And so I take it and I drink it during first and second period. I have it in my canteen. Yeah. And then lunches are usually for me just the leftovers from whatever we had for dinner. And then I'm dairy free. So I found a protein bar that works for me. Nice. And that's my snack. And then sometimes I'll have some almonds and that's pretty much what I do. And then dinner. And then we've stopped eating after dinner. That was the word. That was probably the hardest thing. Yeah. So that, and it also helps that we're also going to bed when our children go to bed, because our children go to bed later now because they're older, and we're like, okay, we just need to go to bed because Sarah's alarm goes off at 4:50. Yeah. So, we're not going to bed at 11 or 12. We're going to bed at 10.
Nice. I mean, it's really, I think what you said is so true. Yeah. It is a privilege that you have a family that is so supportive, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily have that. And at the same time, that's not to downplay any of the challenges that you have had, because on paper and in actuality, between cancer, raising kids, pandemic job as a teacher, plus like, oh man, all the stuff you've kind of gone through, losing your mom, like there's a lot of challenges you've overcome in the process. So I want to ask, like, what's the trajectory do you see your family going on over the next year, 5 years, 10 years? Like, where do you see yourself when you envision your future as it relates to your family's health and well-being, as well as your own personal goals and aspirations?
Well, I mean, I think I love the idea, and it's one thing that that I really appreciate about what you've done with this program is that there's no, I mean, with like I can liken this as much as I want to, a training plan, I'm training for this or whatever, but it's not. I mean, the ultimate, sort of the ultimate destination is death. And so if we're just working our best, to better our lives, and then I think that's all you can do. Making conscious choices, life is messy. Yeah. I think if nothing else, we've all learned how precarious the hold is, our control. Everything is constantly changing, and the tighter we hold to it, the less likely that we're going to be able to sort of like not just hold on to it, but just like change with it. And so as far as our family is, yes. Yeah. And I think that's like the big thing, that the big takeaway, it's like what I see myself doing in the next year is just continuing on this journey at a pace that makes sense. And if something just, if I stall out a little bit, spend a little bit more time in one phase versus another, then I'm fine with that, because I'm still on the journey. I'm still connected to the community. There are many people that I can reach out to. Amy is wonderful. Yeah. And then I have my support system through Evan and the kids. I think for our children, it's really just about modeling. They see us. I mean, they've known we've done other stuff, right, with the running and things, but they see us go out into the garage and do our workouts. We don't do the gym workouts. We've just kind of got enough set up in the garage that we make that work. And I think I kind of like that better, though, because then they're seeing us do it. And I think knowing from my own personal experience, like growing up in the family that I grew up in, and they were wonderful, but, the things that were modeled to me were not, it was not this. It was not like, I just feel like maybe they'll come to it sooner. And I think they will, because my son's super active he loves baseball so much. And my daughter with her dancing, and we continue to put good quality food in front of them and just say, hey, adventure bites, things like that. I think that's all we can do. For
sure. And I mean, the modeling, right? I mean, they're learning from observation and soaking it all in and seeing that this is like the new norm, and you're also expressing your values through action. And then the other step to this, I'm not saying you will do this necessarily, but now that they have passions in their lives, is helping teach our kids how the things that they eat help either support or detract from those passions. Like as your son starts to understand that there's certain 100%. Foods that help him hit the ball more consistently, get to base faster, be stronger, and like if you can tie something to someone's early core values, then it becomes like you're making these early neuroassociations that can carry on far into life. And that's a powerful prospect in parenting that I think your kids have the opportunity to really receive.
Yeah, I hope so. They're pretty smart. So even if they get off track somewhere like we all do, hopefully eventually they'll find their way back and be like, oh yeah, I remember they talked about that. Oh yeah, my parents were right.
All right, I want to ask you some off the rails stuff. And I mean, not like fully off the rails, but like a little bit off the fit mother rails. And it's really your perspective of being a teacher.
Okay.
And like, this is my outsider's perspective. I believe like we're in a really interesting time where kids have more access to information than ever before, yet there's probably more distraction than ever before, where we also are at a time where, kids' health is not as good as it was maybe like 10, 20 years ago due to inactivity, maybe the phone stuff, maybe a lot of sugary food. Like, what do you see? And this is like asking you to fix the whole thing, but what do you see as like suggestions or insider's view on like what we can do as maybe both parents or as like the system itself to help raise a healthier, happier, more well-adjusted, confident generation of kids? Or the other perspective is like, where do we think there's pitfalls that are very obvious to you being around so many of other people's different kids and getting that perspective?
That's an incredible question because it's something that I've really been thinking about. When I talked about integration earlier, I wasn't just talking about my family and my own personal life. One of the things that I am grappling with right now is really just around like the emotional and physical health of our country, our world's children. I've taught both middle and high school. I've spent most of my time in high school. What's really interesting is like I'll ask questions like just starter questions at the beginning of the class period. How's your water intake? How are you doing with your water? Like, are you drinking water? And I will say that I think that this generation is much better about drinking water than mine was. I'm a Gen Xer, and I remember hardly ever drinking water. I mean, I didn't drink a lot of soda, but I drank a lot of milk and I drank a lot of juice. They do drink a lot of water. Often they'll have water bottles with them. But they, on the other hand, like you were saying, I mean, they do drink. Like, I feel like the energy drinks are not what they were about 5-10 years ago when energy drinks were like, and there's I don't know how much the laws are different state to state, but Washington State's laws around, percent of, sugar, or maybe it's federal, percent of sugar in food like that they can get out of the vending machine at school is next to none. But I've thought a lot about this. I've worked in big comprehensive high school. I've worked in a larger middle school, but right now I'm at a pretty small school. It's still part of a public school district, but it's a choice school where we have right now, because we're growing, we opened in the pandemic, which was crazy. We're a hands-on school and we opened in the pandemic, and we have about 100 students, and we have this whole different sort of take on, we're trying on education. And one of the things that we do is on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, we have special sessions that each teacher leads, or we get kids off campus to do community service outreach, or we're headed towards getting them into internships. But one thing that I've been doing in the last month is I'm not a yoga teacher, but I've been playing yoga videos in my room, and kids sign up. Awesome. And they come and do yoga with me. Yeah. And I just think more things like that. Exposure, exposure education for them is huge. Modeling for them, I think, is huge. I know that, when I've talked to my students before, like, oh, I'm training for this. And they're like, what? And I think even that is good. But on a larger scale, I don't know. I originally, when I was asked to come on here onto your podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, I have these questions, for Dr. A about like, what about, not just like what about Fit Teen Project? Something, because that's the world I live in. Like you're saying, these kids, if they can learn all of this sooner, then perhaps their lifespan will be healthier.
I totally agree. And I mean, it's a
As they
difference
kind of
between
figure out
like
what they want to do.
fit father and fit mother in some sense for many people is like a little bit of like reactive medicine. It's peeling back years of bad habits, and it's an undoing effect. And I do totally see the vision
Right.
for a world where we have better education that can like head off some of these issues early on, and it could be a lot more proactive. So that comes down to like really fundamentally changing curriculum to include stuff like nutrition, to make movement less threatening and not as fully centered around sports per se for kids who don't play. Because I imagine in high school, it's like if you play sports, you're fairly active. If you don't, you may not be doing nearly as much. And then there's the idea of phones and how those interface with people's circadian rhythms and the cascade of like the effects of like late night phone exposure and even the effects of dopamine. Like, we live in a very complicated world that makes it challenging for young people to have mental and physical health. And man, I think if like someone knew the answer, hopefully we'd be doing more of it. But I do think it's amazing now that you are not just being a model for your kids, but now with your sphere of influence are extending that out. And I'm sure there's other teachers that are taking notice of seeing like your well-being, and it rubs off in some effect. I think what I can say is, in my own personal opinion, is that goodness is contagious. Like the good feeling of well-being in ourselves is contagious. So if that is the healthy virus, that is the good thing, that like we continue to show up in this way and it has some kind of effect, and we can't always understand the full ripple effects of what's possible from our own daily choices. And maybe also the bit is like we want to change the world, but also it's the humility of also understanding that we are here to like live our lives to the best of our ability and make the impact that we can, and not carry the whole weight of the world on our shoulders, because it's a lot going on. I don't know. This is your podcast, not mine. I'm just kind of like rambling at this point, but I'm sure you've had very similar thoughts, and it's an important topic.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I think it's interesting. One of the things that I'm working on with my freshmen right now is is around like it. Okay, the unit's called World's End, so it's very post-apocalyptic. But so then a lot of the stories like discuss like, basically technology and how it brings us kind of to this head and things. And so, yeah, I mean, I get students who come into first period and they're, I'm so tired. I was up till 3, and things like that. And that is actually, when I mentioned before, like one of my intros being like, how's your hydration? One of my intros that I did really recently was, how's your sleep? Especially since winter break, it's like, is your sleep schedule completely screwed up because they stay up too late? And that's kind of like I think it's worse. It is worse with the advent of cell phones. In fact, like being a teacher for 18 years, I was there at the beginning of the smartphone, that was my first 5 years of teaching was smartphones came in, and it was like, oh my gosh. And the constant battle between, should we take their phones, or what do we do with that whole sort of like power struggle that that all teachers have with students who are probably high school aged. So I don't know. I mean, a lot of that unfortunately has to do with upbringing and the values going on at home, but it also is beyond parents in a lot of ways, because the internet is so pervasive, and I think we just have to figure out how to harness that power, that in a way that we're working with it instead of against it. I guess if that makes sense. That's kind of a vague. No,
it does make sense to me for sure. And I also think there's this idea of, again, I came back and I mentioned this earlier, but how do we connect to kids' core values, what they care about today, now, and show them how their behaviors are either adding or kind of subtracting from that. So if I can think back to my mentality in high school, like I wanted to be perceived as attractive by the opposite sex. I wanted to excel well in school. I wanted to look cool, feel cool, like look good, do well at the things I cared about. And so if that is the mentality that many of us share and have, how do we start to tie the habits around sleep and phones and like what kind of foods are supportive to that? I think there's a massive education component, because if you can get someone to have emotional buy-in earlier, then it's not just like prescriptive didactic kind of stuff like eat the apple, it's got vitamins. Like, who knows what a vitamin is when they're in high school? Like, it doesn't even matter. But you eat a certain way, you don't have you have less acne, and maybe you have a little more energy, and like that could be move the needle for some people.
Yeah, for sure. I think the kind of the combo between sort of your typical health and fitness classes with bringing in the science teachers is really probably a lot of where that could happen. But then there's the social emotional component that has been really important. Coming out of the pandemic in particular, but also just, I mean, with all of the phones, there's so much emotional sort of trauma, like with bullying or just misunderstood, conversations, and it's just distracting to them, and their frontal lobes are not fully developed, so they don't necessarily always they don't know what's best for them, or they think whatever.
Well, it's complex for sure. Now my mind is kind of spinning, and I think we could go down the rabbit hole over this for a long time. So I kind of wanted to loop it back a little bit to, in conclusion, towards your personal story and journey. And I want to ask you, now that you've kind of gone through this, I know in relation to the many intense things you've done in fitness in the past, it hasn't been called Fit Mother. It's been run a 50K, do a weight loss plan with Noom. Like, this is a little, by its very packaging, like holistic. So I want to ask you, what does it mean to you to be a fit mother? What's the significance of that idea to you?
Well, I think for me, it ties it back to sort of my phase in life. I'm just going to get really real right here. And I am full on premenopausal. Like, in the last few months, I'm just like, cycles are nuts. And for me, I'm really sort of at this, I feel like I'm on this sort of precipice of, here's the first half of my life, and how do I want to interact or engage or embrace the second half of my life? I've already had cancer, so we're just going to assume I've checked that box and I don't ever have to deal with it again. But it's really, for me, it just means like coming into sort of a communion with sort of this phase of myself as a woman. It's just kind of crazy. My daughter's at one end of this spectrum of being a woman, and I'm at the other. And it's just like, oh my God, it's really awe-inspiring. It's kind of enraging. I'm not going to lie. I actually ordered the Balance supplement, and I've been taking that for I think I've got almost a week under my belt of the Balance supplement, because I was doing maca powder before, and I'm like, I need a little more. But I think it's just about being really upfront and transparent with people about the journey that I'm going through. And if I'm telling them, I'm doing this thing, I'm like, fit mother, if you want to hear about it. But also, I think being transparent with, the phase that I'm in. I was standing at the end of the hall with two of my coworkers yesterday, male coworkers, and they were like, "How are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, you really want to know?" I'm like, I am premenopausal. And I just said it because I think our society is so, or maybe it's not just our society, but I think a lot of societies are very like, don't talk about that. We talk about menopause even less than we talk about, puberty, and all of those changes. So for me, being a fit mom is really, it's really just about embracing and loving myself in this new phase of my life. And I would love the goal of being stronger in the second half of my life than I was in the first half. I think that's pretty amazing. Badass.
Yeah. Honestly, Sarah, that was like, and this is my opinion, one of the most beautiful answers I've heard. Because I think it is this dance of like authenticity and some surrender to the natural trajectory of our bodies, especially with a woman's body at that time and phase. It's ownership. It's holding this idea of a stronger future, like improvements can still be made in spite of this, and this is what's happening. There's power in speaking into it publicly, like you said, and just like saying it out loud. This is what happens. It's like in that very speaking of that truth, there's so much there. I'm just kind of like really inspired by that answer. I'm so glad that you got vulnerable and you said that. I think it's one of the best things you said on this podcast, and you've said a lot of best things.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Well, I mean, this is all I have here. I'll say like one final question would be, do you have any words of advice or wisdom for women who are starting out and following this program, maybe in the early stages, kind of like you are, or just starting out?
Yeah. I think it kind of circles back to what I talked about before, just that life is messy, and we're all gonna go off our railroad track. Things happen, deaths in the family. I know, talking about like the next phase of my life, my father is stage 4 cancer, but he's been there for like 2 years, and with the medications out there now, he's just sort of holding pattern, but it's coming, right? And we're in this almost caretaking phase of our lives, my husband and I, where we're watching the generation above us become weaker. And I just, you gotta work with it. You have to embrace the mess and embrace the chaos and ask for help when you need it, and be gentle with yourself. It doesn't help if, you come at a day and you're like, oh my God, it's the end of the day and you're like, I did this and this wrong, or I didn't drink all my water, or I didn't, I forgot to drink my shake, and so I ate this for lunch. And all of this, these sort of, I think that's where the training plans are really tricky. You can write the best training plan for nutrition or a race or for Fit Mother or whatever, but you have to look at it with grace. And I did it 2 days ago. I was mentioning like, just like my cycles are insane. And I was supposed to do my total body burn workout on Wednesday. And I came home and I was like, okay, I'm going to do my yoga and see how that feels. I did my yoga and I was like, yeah, I need to listen to my body and I need to pull back, and that's okay. It's totally okay. And sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes you fall off for longer, but you can still restart. You can always press the restart button. Yeah, I think forgiveness is the key. Showing yourself as much grace and forgiveness that you would show someone else.
Dang, we'll do like the metaphoric, literal mic drop after that. It was such a beautiful way to end this. Thank you. And I think it's funny too. Like I gotta say, just to think back to the beginning of this conversation, that you were a little nervous to come on here and share and be so authentic. And I couldn't imagine this having gone any better, truly. Like with what you were able to share, the range of stuff that we could have covered in this amount of time. Like my heart feels very touched by many of the things you said that I'll reflect on for the coming days. And I just want to appreciate you again for being a part of this community, for the beautiful year you have ahead, for the grace and the wisdom that you have with yourself and that you're reminding all of us to have with ourselves. It's really inspiring. Thank you, Sarah Rose.
Thank you.